So you want to make a difference?
Yeah.
Trust me, you're going to love it. And which branch are you interested in joining?
I'm going to be a pilot. Best in the galaxy. I've been running scams on the street since I was 10. I was kicked out of the flight academy for having a mind of my own.
Hey, kid. I'm putting together a crew. You in?
That's yes.
I might be the only person. Who knows what you really are?
What's that?
Get ready.
Thought we were in trouble there for a second, but it's fine. We're fine.
Your name?
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it. I am your host, John Justice, here for episode number 110 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. And as we begin to move on past The Last Jedi, but don't worry, we got a lot of Last Jedi talk to get to on the show this week. We move forward, and finally, we've got some solo A Star Wars Story footage in the form of two different teasers, essentially. And it's interesting, too, because they did drop two teasers, and the fuller teaser, doing that thing with my fingers, actually omitted a lot of the footage from the first teaser. So we're going to spend the first part of the show talking about just my initial gut feelings over the footage. I'm not necessarily a fan of shot by shot breakdowns. I'm personally trying to move on past this idea of getting into too much speculation, especially when it comes to the spin-off movies. With the saga films, it's a little bit different. That is fun, and I'm certainly am one to go down that road. But when it comes to these movies, I'd rather just give, at least in the beginning, my initial assessment of the footage. Kind of what did I gravitate towards? What did I like? Is there anything that I didn't like? We'll talk a little bit about the characters, talk a little bit of speculation of what we saw, but I don't want to get into a full sort of trailer breakdown. I like just to kind of go with my gut and give you my instinctive reaction based off of what we saw. Needless to say, I was left with the 45-second teaser trailer, kind of going, okay, looks good. Watching the full teaser today, I'm all on board the hype train now. This movie looks fantastic. And to quote, you name it from the Star Wars universe, there's several people that have said this in the movies, this is where the fun begins. This movie looks like a lot of fun, but on top of that, it looks gorgeous. And that's probably where I'll start. So we're going to talk Solo and the footage that we saw, and then, like I said, the second part of the show this week, we'll talk a little bit more Last Jedi, a couple of things that came to mind listening to some other shows, a couple of angles in the Last Jedi that we haven't discussed in the past or haven't talked about in the past. So again, that'll be the second part of the show. But let's get right into it. No photos leading into the teaser during the Super Bowl, apart from what had been leaked, the Legos and some of the artwork that we know is going on the packaging. We're in uncharted territory when it comes to Disney and Lucasfilm and how they're marketing this movie. And leading into the Super Bowl, word began to come out that we were going to get a trailer, and then sure enough, we slowly began to realize as fans that we're going to get a 45-second teaser, and I was completely wrong in my prediction last week, by the way. I totally own that, because I didn't think they would drop it on the Super Bowl, and they did. So we got a 45-second teaser, and then today, on Monday, we got a full, a little bit over a minute and a half full teaser, and they're calling it a teaser. And the trailers themselves really do have a lot in common with the way previous movies, TFA, The Last Jedi, and Rogue One were marketed, and we'll talk about this. But the teaser that we got during the Super Bowl was cool. There wasn't a whole lot to it. You heard basically in the intro, you heard a mashup that was an extended sort of supercut of both that teaser and the full teaser put together. You did get to hear Alden Ehrenreich talking as Han Solo. You got to see an image of him right at the very end of that teaser. Some shots of Emilia Clarke, one quick shot of Donald Glover playing Lando, Woody Harrelson playing Beckett, but not really anything other than a vibe of what this movie was going to be. So we'll start here. First off, the cinematography, and this is the thing that I was most surprised by when it comes to this footage. The cinematography in this thing looks spectacular. I was expecting it to look a little bit more straightforward and simple. Maybe closer. It had a lot of Rogue One vibes to it, but having watched the footage, we'll just say that for the rest of the show, having watched this footage now several times, it really has, at least for me, more of a Blade Runner 2049 vibe, not in terms of the color palette, but just the way the cinematography is done and these action shots are positioned and set up. It looks spectacular. That's what really took me aback when I saw that 45 seconds on Sunday night. It wasn't so much there weren't any sort of wow moments. There wasn't anything that really kind of made me go, whoa. I just was like, all right, I've got as I tweeted out, I said, I've got my ticket to the hype train. I'll reserve my judgment for the full trailer that we got today. But when you compare the 45-second teaser that we got in today's longer footage, it really does kind of fall in line with the way that they laid out those first teasers for The Force Awakens. And it's almost like we're getting the same sort of set of trailers like we did for The Force Awakens. Like that 45-second teaser was closer to that original November 2014 teaser that we got for The Force Awakens. That was only 88 seconds long and just kind of showed some quick shots from the movie. And of course, it was all very emotional for those of us that have been waiting those 10 long years to see new footage. And then when we got the full teaser, that was a little bit more. You got more of the characters, not so much anything in terms of story. And then when you get the full trailer, you get the story. And it really seems like this is going to follow that pattern. The fact that Disney and Lucasfilm is calling today's Monday trailer a teaser would indicate that we're going to get a fully fleshed out trailer that'll tell some of the story, just like we did with The Last Jedi, just like we did with Rogue One, just like we did with The Force Awakens. But I will say that the Sunday trailer kind of hit me the way that Rogue One did. And this is a tough movie. This is a movie, the Han Solo backstory isn't really anything the fandom has been clamoring for. I don't know if I've seen anybody post, man, I'm so glad they're going with this Solo movie. You see everybody saying, I hope it's good. I'm certainly going to watch it. But you haven't seen the fandom out there, begging for a Han Solo movie, and a lot of question marks around whether or not Alden Ehrenreich can carry off this character. Will we accept him as being Han Solo? So, at least for me, for this fan, I'm watching with low expectations. So the Sunday night teaser didn't hit me upside the head. apart from that looks really good, okay, I'm in, give me more. The full teaser today on Monday was great. Now I'm on board. We got more in the way of dialogue from Alden Ehrenreich. We got a little bit more sort of understanding based off of some of the shots of what's actually going on. We still don't have the storyline yet. We got a little bit better images of who the villain is, even though we have no idea what their backstory is. Most importantly, though, we're getting Star Wars vibes. Different. Still different. If you were going to compare it to anything, again, I compare it to Rogue One. We're getting this new music that we haven't heard before that is different, but also has that tinge of Star Wars, and I'm accepting that. I'm cool with that. And like I said, we're getting Solo vibes. Lawrence Kasdan is the man who's written Han Solo the most, right? He's written for Han Solo in The Force Awakens. He did for Return of the Jedi. He did for The Empire Strikes Back. So Alden Ehrenreich is portraying this iconic character, but the words that are being written are written by the man that's written all the dialogue for Han Solo. So what I liked in the way that Alden Ehrenreich so far has delivered the lines that we've heard, and albeit it's very, very minimal, but it's enough for me to go, okay, this is a different interpretation of Solo than we've heard before, okay? It's not Alden Ehrenreich attempting to duplicate a Han Solo impersonation. This is Alden Ehrenreich and his interpretation of Han Solo. What makes it, though, Solo, to me, it's all going to be in the writing. Partly how he delivers it, but mostly in those words that Lawrence Kasdan has written, because he's the man who creates that character. And so far, from everything that we've heard in the trailer, I mean, it sounds great. And as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and play it again. Now, this is about 2 minutes, and it's a supercut. And so now that we've had a chance to talk about it a little bit, let me add in one more little nugget in here before we play this back again. We saw Donald Glover portraying Lando. Haven't heard from him yet, but he looks the part. Of course, you got Chewie in there. The Millennium Falcon, which is in its heyday. You see the interior all nice and pristine and clean. You see that the nose of the Falcon has got that extra piece that gives it a more aerodynamic shape. It's got all of its paneling on it. This takes place over the course of several years of Han Solo's life leading into A New Hope. So we can only guess, and this is where some speculation comes in, that are we going to see what happens to the Falcon during the course of this movie to find out why it's a piece of junk that Luke Skywalker sees when we see it in A New Hope? I mean, that's kind of what the expectation is, right? I mean, by the time we get to it in A New Hope, that paneling's torn off, the nose piece is gone, it's pretty dingy inside, so it must get put through the ringer during this movie, I would assume. So the one other thing I want to mention is one of the other voices you hear in here, along with Woody Harrelson's character, is the Emilia Clarke character, Kira. And at the beginning of the trailer, you see what I'm, again, speculating, what I said I wasn't going to do right. Speculating is early on in Solo's life. You see him on a speeder being chased by what looks to be a stormtrooper and another speeder. You also see Kira in the speeder with him. Later in the trailer, you see a much more elegant Emilia Clarke and Kira. You see her with a different, much nicer, almost regal-esque clothes on. And she's departing the Millennium Falcon. So we know the movie takes place over, I think, if I'm not mistaken, like 7 years. The movie takes place over 7 years. And so I think what we're seeing is a bit of a progression. You're seeing perhaps a relationship that Han Solo had with this particular character at an early age, and she ends up moving on with her life and becoming very successful, while, Han Solo is kind of stuck as being the smuggler. Entertainment Weekly did put out some tidbits where they did like a shot-by-shot breakdown, and they alluded to that. They alluded to Emilia Clarke having moved on with life and finding some success, while Han Solo didn't. So, listening back to the footage here, it puts a bit of context on Emilia Clarke and her character, and her saying that how she knows him. Okay, so let's go ahead and listen back to this footage again.
So you want to make a difference?
Yeah.
Trust me, you're going to love it.
And which branch are you interested in joining?
I'm going to be a pilot. Best in the galaxy. I've been running scams on the street since I was 10. I was kicked out of the flight academy for having a mind of my own.
Hey, kid. I'm putting together a crew. You in?
That's yes.
I might be the only person. Who knows what you really are?
What's that?
Get ready.
Thought we were in trouble there for a second, but it's fine. We're fine.
Your name?
And again, this is a different Star Wars now. This is the future of the franchise beyond the saga movies. And seeing the footage for this, right? Because this looks like just a fun romp. This looks like and I don't necessarily like making this comparison, but this looks like sort of a Marvel Cinematic Universe type movie, sort of an Ant-Man to the Avengers movies, right? You're not going to get deep into mythology with this movie any more than you did with Rogue One. It may enhance some viewing of the previous films that were released by providing backstory on how Han met Chewie, obviously, and how he got the Falcon and Lando, how he made the Kessel Run. Side note, by the way, the Kessel Run was rumored to be made up of black holes. And so in the trailer itself, when you see the Star Destroyer and the swirling clouds around it chasing the Millennium Falcon, they could be right in the middle of the Kessel Run. We believe that's actually going to take place within the movie. So when you go watch the other films, you may end up having some mental backstory that you didn't have before, but you're not going to get in depth with the mythology. I mean, we're not going to be discussing Rogue One for years to come, or Solo, a Star Wars story, for years to come, the way that we continue to talk about the prequels, the original trilogy, and certainly the sequel trilogy. That being said, it's these movies that are also going to keep the franchise alive. It's these movies that are going to bring more eyes and fans throughout the years to the series, which will hopefully continue to prop up, as generations get older, the saga films, or whatever comes of Rian Johnson's trilogy, which I would imagine is going to be steeped in that same type of lore, to where we'll be doing a lot of speculating again. This just looks like a great Star Wars movie. And it's one that we can go in to as fans and just have a good time. After The Last Jedi, which you know that I love, and I'm going to spend another 45 minutes here in just a moment talking about how much I love that movie, there is something to be said to being able to go into the cinema or be able to pop in, the Star Wars movie and just sit back and just have fun. I mean, the original Star Wars was that way. I mean, we're going to be, at least in my opinion, with a movie like Solo, A Star Wars Story, we're going to be walking out of that a lot the way we did when we as kids saw the original Star Wars movie. It was just fun to watch, and we didn't spend a lot of time as kids talking about the mythology and what could happen. We were just like, man, that's a great movie. And so these spin-off movies have a chance to sort of be their own little Star Wars, original Star Wars movies, especially for new generations of fans. And I like the fact that these are looking different. This movie looks drastically different than anything. I mean, again, the closest thing is Rogue One, but even the cinematography in this, it just looks great, frame by frame. I love Blade Runner 2049, and when I'm looking at the screen grabs. I mean, any one of these screen grabs could be. I'm looking at Thady Newton, her character Val, you see in the trailer, holding the really big gun. You could frame that, right next to it is the smiling Donald Glover playing Lando. You could frame that. Any one of these shots, they just look spectacular. So yeah, man, I am absolutely on board. My expectations for this film, I think it's just going to be fun, and I think that any of these movies that are able to push the boundaries and be successful is only going to benefit Star Wars in the future years and the generations to come down the road. The heck with all the controversy of Lord and Miller, and what happened with them getting fired and Ron Howard, getting on board. The heck with them waiting forever to get the marketing done. This movie comes out in 3 months, man, and I cannot wait. This is way better than I could have imagined, and I was going in with low expectations, but I am really, truly psyched. What a fantastic time to be a Star Wars fan, where you still have The Last Jedi in theaters. You can still go see it right now if you wanted to, and man, we are just a few months away from a brand new, what looks to be spectacular Star Wars movie. We'll certainly be talking about Solo, A Star Wars Story in the weeks to come. Episode number 111. We'll be focusing on the rest of this week because Entertainment Weekly is going to be doing a week of Solo stories, so we'll have a lot to get to coming up in episode 111. In the meantime, we still have a lot to get to for episode number 110.
Something inside me has always been there, but now it's awake. And I need help.
All right, there's a couple of things from last week's show that we didn't get a chance to talk about. One of them being listener feedback. I got a couple of emails and comments from YouTube that I want to go over, and we'll do that at the end of the show. Also, a new line of thinking about The Last Jedi, and I'm pretty sure it's a road that I haven't gone down yet. I heard Jason Ward on the MakingStarWars.net podcast make a comment about the Last Jedi and the Force Awakens, and it got my mind. I was out walking the dog, and it got my mind going, and I came upon a thought, a line of thinking, kind of a revelation about The Last Jedi that I really want to share with you. So before we get to that, though, I do want to talk about watching The Empire Strikes Back for the first time since seeing The Last Jedi. Obviously, I've seen this movie, hundreds of times, and it is, again, way up on the list of my favorite Star Wars movies. There was something about this viewing after watching The Last Jedi that it was another one of these moments where I enjoyed the movie on a different level than I did in the past, and it really wasn't because of anything specific. I think maybe pacing-wise and maybe the way the story plays out, you could loosely make an argument of a mirroring of the Resistance being chased by the First Order in The Last Jedi, mirroring the Empire and Vader chasing after, Princess Leia and Han Solo and Chewbacca. Those elements are certainly there. Somebody had asked me about the Ring theory, and if this movie fits in, if the new sequel trilogy fits into the Ring theory, and if The Last Jedi does. And I think there's a bit of that when you look at the way that The Empire Strikes Back is laid out. If you took The Last Jedi and kind of overlaid it, it would be in a reverse. You get the Walker battle at the end as opposed to the beginning. But there's a lot of elements that are much different. I think the middle and the end do have a bit of a Ring theory thing going on, but my problem with the Ring theory has always been that in order to accomplish that, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. I mean, it's one thing to write a movie. It's one thing to craft out a saga. It's another thing altogether to really craft it in such a way to where the parallels fit into the ring diagram. I think a lot of it just happens just, sort of subconsciously. Almost like when you take a song and you put it over a movie. Like people talk about playing Dark Side of the Moon with the Wizard of Oz, and there's all these interesting places where it links up. Yeah, that's all random. I mean, that just happened to play out that way. So when it comes to the ring theory, you can make an argument and you can make it work, but I don't think that was done by design. We do know that Rian Johnson did go back and watch The Empire Strikes Back and looked at the lighting of a lot of the scenes because he wanted to mirror that. He also went back, and this is very evident in The Last Jedi, in my opinion, but he also went back and said he watched the prequels and took notes on the prequels. And you can certainly see some of those elements in Canto Bight. But getting back to The Empire Strikes Back, that viewing was so enjoyable, and I really can't put my finger on what it was that I enjoyed about it. I think it was just a lot of different things. A movie that I already loved, but now I had a deeper appreciation because of The Last Jedi and how The Last Jedi is paced, seeing these characters, knowing the lineage, knowing the story of Ben Solo, and thinking that, oh wow, this is going to be their kid and this is their early story. And to me, the Star Wars movies all complement each other, and they all work together really well, even though they're very different in a lot of ways. So I would be curious to see if you had a similar reaction to watching any of the other films after seeing The Last Jedi. The Force Awakens didn't do this for me. Rogue One did for A New Hope. There's no doubt about that. When I watch A New Hope now, I watch it with a different lens over my eyes, knowing what happened in Rogue One. But there was just something about The Empire Strikes Back after watching The Last Jedi that really made that for an incredibly enjoyable experience. So, all right, so let's move on. Speaking of The Last Jedi, before we get to this new line of thinking that I want to go down and something I want to share with you, just kind of a thought, kind of a revelation that popped into my head. I want to talk, and this plays into it. I want to talk just briefly about Reylo, about Ben Solo and Rey, and that relationship in The Last Jedi. And I know that even on I don't know. I believe that there is a part of the criticism from the fandom of The Last Jedi that I think they've been kind of vocal about it, but I think it's a subconscious thing. I think a lot of people, and I think a lot of dudes, just had a hard time with that Reylo situation. Just had a hard time seeing that play out. And once again, I've mentioned this on a previous show, but there was actually an article or a YouTube video put out about talking about how you can't do romance in Star Wars. And again, I completely disagree. Something about probably the prequels and Anakin and Padme, something about, guys and just the inability to relate potentially to a scenario like that. I don't know. For me, that movie is great because of that relationship. That movie is Kylo Ren and Rey are necessary to have some type of connection, even if it's not romantic. I mean, it's now become the center of this trilogy. And thinking back to how that storyline could have played out without it, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do. That's easy to say when you don't have a movie that didn't do that. But I don't know how you do The Last Jedi without bringing Rey and Kylo Ren together in some way. I don't know what other story works. Because to me, that absolutely works in that movie. Which brings me to the point that I want to make. And this revelation doing that thing with my fingers that I had. And this is thanks to Jason Ward over at MakingStarWars.net, because he's the one that actually got me thinking about this. Because he was commenting on The Last Jedi and it starting where it did right after The Force Awakens, kind of had to happen that way. And it really got my mind going that, you know what? if people are upset with The Last Jedi, they really need to blame J.J. Abrams. And what I mean by that is the details in the story are obviously Rian Johnson's. There's no doubt about that. But J.J. and Lawrence Kasdan, and this is not me complaining by any stretch. I love both these movies. This is just a statement of fact. J.J. and Lawrence Kasdan, they gave Rian Johnson no place to go other than where he went. Luke was already in exile. And to the criticism that people have that that's not their Luke Skywalker, that's not what he would have done, blame J.J. Abrams. Because he's the one that put Luke in exile. And Rian Johnson brought him back and gave him a heroic moment at the end. I didn't want to see Luke get into a massive lightsaber battle, the likes of which we've never seen him do before, because it would absolutely diminish what took place in Return of the Jedi. But look, Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams, they put him on that island. Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams clearly made it so it had something to do with the failure at the Academy. Han Solo says as much, and I know because I just watched the movie again yesterday, The Force Awakens. Han Solo says, one of his students turned on him and killed everybody, and Luke went into exile. J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan made that happen. So these people complaining about Luke and what they did to Luke Skywalker, and what was Rian Johnson supposed to do? Ignore that Luke was in exile and have Rey show up? Rey hands him the lightsaber, and that's the only motivation that the dude needed to go out and save the galaxy as some elderly, for lack of a better word, kick-ass Jedi? No. Now, look, I know people complain about how he took the saber and threw it over his shoulder and all this kind of stuff, and, that's debatable. I have no problem with it. You throw it to the side, you throw it over your shoulder, whatever. He's not taking the saber. Hand it back. I happen to like that moment, but people don't. So if you want to, argue that point, you can. But to argue that this is all Rian Johnson's fault. Now, granted, Rian Johnson wanted to tell this story, and he was happy to tell this story, but J.J. Abrams put him in this position. There's no way we can skip forward. I mean, how can you imagine if we had started The Last Jedi and we skipped forward like 3 months and we never saw what happened in that exchange, and we end up on Octo, and Rey and Luke are ready to go fight the First Order? No. But that wasn't Rian Johnson's fault. That was J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan. Now, this brings me to my other point. And this is me pushing back on the criticism of The Last Jedi. I'm going to. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But the reality is, that Rian Johnson actually saved the future of Star Wars. I think that I've even been looking at this movie wrong. Because with Luke being in exile, because of what happened at the Academy, right? So Rian Johnson has to figure out a way to tell that story. He has to figure out a way, he has to write a story to explain what happened at the Academy, because that's what J.J. Abrams set up, right? So unless you make it a different apprentice, which makes no sense, that turned on him, it has to be Ben. We know it's Ben Solo. He's the one that turned on him, right? Okay, so with that, Rian Johnson is now tasked with trying to lay out the story moving forward. You've got an apprentice who now has gone bad to the dark side, who is now an apprentice to this character Snoke. In the meantime, you've got Luke, who doesn't want to be a Jedi anymore because he's in exile, and you've got no other Jedi out there to train, and you've got this girl that's got the Force. It's woken up in her, and
I need someone,
right,
to show me my place in all this.
Okay, so Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi saved Star Wars, because by the end of The Last Jedi, we have a future. Star Wars didn't have a future at the end of The Force Awakens. The guy who knew the Force didn't want to deal with it anymore. Rey is just kind of this loose cannon that's dealing with the Force, so unless she gets the books or trains herself, we've got no new Jedi coming up. So in the meantime, you just basically have this First Order and this apprentice that are, going to be out there trying to rule the galaxy. And so by the end of The Last Jedi, think about what you have. Okay, everybody's pitching, not everybody, but the people are pitching a fit because they don't know the backstory of Snoke. Okay, and as I explained earlier in the podcast, I've got my own theory for how they can do that. I doubt it's going to happen, but a man can dream, right? By the end of The Last Jedi, what do you have? You have a big bad who is, in my opinion, on par with Darth Vader in terms of emotional distress. Not only that, we've got his backstory. We know more about the bad guy going into episode 9 and how he got there than we do about Darth Vader and Darth Sidious in the original trilogy by the time we got to episode 6. We've got our bad guy, we've got his backstory, and we know and we care about it. He's lethal, right? He's bent on ruling the galaxy now. The girl didn't go with him. He was wrong about that. He's killed his master. Now he's got an army, and he can go out and wreak havoc. If they had kept Snoke, you could only be told what Snoke's backstory was. You didn't get to see it. We've got to see it now. I mean, it really is genius. And it does sort of play into this reverse Anakin when you look at the prequel trilogy. This idea that we're starting off with Kylo being bad and he's slowly getting back to being good. Now, I don't think that quite played out the way that a lot of people thought that it was going to. Like, if you're going to go, I still think there's a redemption arc for Ben Solo, for Kylo Ren that's possible, but that arc now is a little bit, we're now peaking on the top end of bad, in my opinion, because by the end of The Last Jedi, one can argue that he's, and I think he is, that he's in worse emotional shape, and more deadly than he was in The Force Awakens. But that being said, if we kept Snoke as the bad guy and didn't kill him off, or we could only be told what his backstory was, we didn't get to see it. With Kylo Ren, we get to see it. And on top of that, not only do you have a bad guy and a backstory to the bad guy, that you don't need another set of prequel trilogy movies to right? You don't need a set of movies between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens to tell Kylo Ren's backstory. We've already seen it in flashbacks. We're good. Solid. On top of that, you have a new young Jedi to be in Rey to pass along and do what? To make more Jedi. And you've got kids out there like Broom Boy, right, who are ready to go and take up the fight. The Last Jedi saved Star Wars. And all along, I was under the impression that when we got to The Last Jedi and got to the end of The Last Jedi, we were going to be looking at something completely different. We were going to be, looking at, the end of the Jedi, and we would see more of what people call the sort of gray Jedi. I really don't think that's the case anymore. I think we're moving away from the labels. So to a certain extent that's happening, but I think that in truth, no, we're now at a place where we're sort of back to what we're used to in Star Wars with these characters. And unfortunately, with the death of Han Solo and now the death of Luke Skywalker, I'm sure he'll come back as a ghost, and the untimely passing of Carrie Fisher, we now, as an audience, have to embrace and can embrace these new characters in full carrying this movie in episode 9. And to me, that's cool. I mean, that's great. But for all the complaining about The Last Jedi, I think people failed to see that what Rian Johnson did was he brought it back to a point where now J.J. Abrams can go and close this thing out and give us another Star Wars movie that still has all the Star Wars elements at its core. Because you could say if we went into 9 and we stripped away the Sith completely and we stripped away the Jedi and we went into 9 with something fresh and new, I'm not necessarily sure that we need that right now. I think we're going to get that with whatever Rian Johnson is going to do with his other trilogy in the future. You've got J.J. Abrams now coming back in 9 to wrap this story up, and I think that's the perfect person to go and wrap this up. Because essentially now J.J. Abrams gets to make a sequel to The Force Awakens in a way that, I don't want to word, I'm not wording this right, but the characters haven't really moved too far in terms of where they are. Kylo Ren is still bad and Rey is still bad. But I mean, Rey is still good. But now they're both skilled. Now they've both gone through this challenge of The Last Jedi. So now J.J. Abrams can do a follow-up and really bring these characters home. I'm sure that he had an idea in his head of how he would like to see this wrapped up. Now he's got all the weight and emotion of The Last Jedi firmly cemented in that story so that he can go and take these two characters in this final story and this final confrontation and bring it and absolutely bring it home to create this amazing final chapter of all these movies. So I'll just say it again. The Last Jedi really did save Star Wars. By the end of The Last Jedi, we have Star Wars has a future. Because going into at the end of The Force Awakens, Star Wars didn't have a future. Apart from the First Order going and wreaking havoc across the galaxy, right? It's really cool too to see Rian Johnson going out and continuing to do these interviews and tell all the backstory of the movie. It's really, really unique and different and neat to see that he's been doing these hour-long interviews with all these different outlets and just really just giving out all the details of the film and his thought process. And every time I hear something that I haven't heard before that's new, I continue to gain more respect for this guy and just the love and attention and care that he put into this movie. And I've watched it now for a 10th time, and I adore this. I adore this flick. You know, it was funny. I was sitting down and I watched before I watched The Last Jedi, I went and I watched The Force Awakens, and again, watching The Force Awakens and that movie too. I love that movie, and I'm about halfway through The Force Awakens, and I'm going, man, I don't know. I think I might still like The Force Awakens more. I was just really having a good time watching it and getting a kick out of it, and got to the end in the battle with Rey and Kylo and knowing what happens in the next one, it just takes on this whole other layer, and I'm like, oh man, I don't know, this is really tough. And then I went and watched The Last Jedi again, and I just went, oh no, I love The Last Jedi more. There's just so much depth and emotion, and by the time you get to the end of that movie, there's just the highs in that film, and some of those quiet moments are just so impactful and so good. Every time I watch it, it becomes clearer and clearer to me just the attention to detail and care that Rian Johnson put into that movie. And speaking of which, this is something I haven't talked about yet, but that attention to detail and care, and another criticism that I've heard, is Captain Phasma, right? I heard some people complaining, a lot of people have complained about Captain Phasma and how she wasn't in this movie a lot either, and they were bummed out because they wanted to see her more in the Last Jedi. I mean, in the Force Awakens. What I find really amusing about that, though, is that the complaint that I heard about the Force Awakens was that she wasn't in it enough and didn't have any action scenes in it, right? And many people said that could have been remedied in The Force Awakens had they made Captain Phasma fight Finn on Takodana instead of that First Order trooper. That's the argument. I've heard people say if you just did that fight a little bit different and didn't have Phasma killed, right? But you had that fight on Takodana after the First Order comes and destroys Maz Kanata's castle, then they would have been more accepting of having Captain Phasma in the Force Awakens, right? So what do we get in The Last Jedi? Well, we get her towards the end of the film, and then we get this awesome fight between Finn and Phasma, and people still aren't happy. You know what? We're Star Wars fans, I guess. I'm always pleased, and there's just people that aren't. But I haven't talked about that fight, and I really, really do love that fight. My only complaint about that fight between Phasma and Finn on the Supremacy is that it's too short. But it's choreographed really well. I'm pretty sure that's Gwendolyn Christie in the armor fighting against Finn, and I know that John Boyega said that he specifically trained because he wanted to be the one to fight. He didn't want to use a stunt double. That's a really, really good fight scene. And one of my favorite moments, actually two of my favorite moments aren't even the fight itself. The fight itself is great. It's just too short. But the moment when Rose shoots Phasma and the laser blast bounces off the armor is great. But the shot that I love the most is after Phasma knocks down Finn, knocks him down into that hole before the riser comes up and he clocks her across the helmet. She turns around and she's just standing up and she starts firing a bunch of blasts, from her blaster at Rose. And she's a bam, 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 bam. And she's just, her pose in that moment and the way that she's just rattling off those laser blasts is just so cool to me. It's just one of those shots where I just go, man, that is so what I want. That's all I needed from Phasma. I just needed to see her in action. And we got her in action. I remember when the action figure came out, from the Force Awakens, the first run of the action figure for Captain Phasma, the artwork for all the action figures for both movies is really, really good. But the artwork for the Captain Phasma figure shows her with her bigger blaster running, and I do remember thinking to myself, "Oh, cool, we're going to see Captain Phasma." In a battle sequence, in action in the movie, based off of the art of the action figure in The Force Awakens, and of course that didn't happen. But again, Rian Johnson gave it to us in this movie, and just that whole sequence, and then BB-8 with the walker, really, and then the shot. The other, I'm just geeking out now, but when they get into Phasma's shuttle, and they take off from the Supremacy, and they fly out through the debris, and you can see the two halves of the Supremacy broken in space. Just again, another amazing visual shot. And one more note, and then we'll get to some listener feedback, since we're going super long with the show this week. But obviously, it was necessary. The other thing I wanted to mention in the movie is you don't get very many clear shots of it in the film, but DJ's ship, the one that he steals with BB-8, is really cool looking. It's very prequel-esque. It looks a lot like the Starfighter from Buck Rogers, for those that are old enough. I really hope they put that out as either a die-cast or a Black Series small die-cast, or even I can dream to get a full-size toy of that one. But that white ship that they leave Cantonica on is really, really cool, and I love the design aesthetic of that ship. I just think it's really neat. Really evokes some of the earlier 80s and 70s spaceships from other series, and I think they were actually, if I'm not mistaken, in the visual dictionary they make mention of that. But if you go and look up Buck Rogers and his Starfighter, the White Starfighter, it looks an awful lot like that, and they took I know they took some inspiration from that. One more just quick sort of side note: the establishing shot of Canto Bight. And I'm curious if it ever gets addressed. There's a ship that flies in, comes in from the bottom of the screen, and comes in and lands before we go into the interior of Canto Bight. And there's a couple of the speeders, the Canto Bight PD speeders that fly by, which I think are really cool too. That ship that flies into frame is exactly the same design as the one that DJ and BB-8 stole, but it's a different color. And I'll have to wait. I'll have to really pay close attention next time I see it. Next time I see the movie in the theater, or when the Blu-ray comes out, because it might just be because it's white and reflective. It's just reflecting more of the sky and the lights coming off the city, to where it looks almost like this faint purple, almost kind of pinkish color. and I remember paying attention the last time I saw the movie, thinking that ship looks exactly like DJ's, but it's a different color. But again, it could just be the fact that that it's just the reflectiveness of the ship itself. But next time you see the movie, when you see it flying in, that's exactly the same ship, and it probably is the ship. That would be silly. All right, one more item of note that just popped into my head, talking about detail, and then we'll get to some listener feedback. But one little thing in the movie that I haven't heard anybody mention that I thought was talking to you want to talk about attention to detail. Okay, well, let me do this first. I want to complain about The Force Awakens, and then I'll tell you why I appreciate some of these little things in The Last Jedi. The one thing that bugs me about The Force Awakens is the lack of attention to detail. And a couple of key things, especially at the beginning. I haven't mentioned this in a long time. I've mentioned one of these things before on the podcast. They did reshoots at the beginning of The Force Awakens in the scene on Jakku and the exchanges between Poe Dameron and Lor San Tekka and Kylo Ren. And it takes me out of the movie every single time I watch it. But you can tell the different, and I'm probably ruining it for people, but I did the last time on the other show, so I'll just do it again. You can tell which scenes were reshoots and which ones weren't, because Kylo Ren's mask is different. In half the shots where Kylo Ren is talking to either Lor San Tekka or Poe Dameron in the Jakku village, the very front faceplate of the mask is pushed up. It's not shoved down all the way, because you know how it opens up and it pops open when he takes his helmet off, and Rey looks at him and goes, "Oh, you're a handsome bad guy." When they did the reshoots, or when they originally shot it, they didn't close it all the way, so there's a gap at the bottom of Kylo Ren's mask for half those shots, and it drives me nuts. I've tried to retcon it in my mind. I've tried to come up with some sort of rational explanation when I watch the movie of why that would happen. Like maybe the front faceplate moves based off of how angry Kylo Ren is or something. You know, maybe it's the way he shows expression, but it just doesn't match anything in the movie. So that drives me nuts. The other thing that ticks me off about the beginning of that movie and the lack of attention to detail is two things that happen with Poe Dameron's X-Wing fighter before it gets blown up. So when the First Order first arrives and Poe Dameron comes, I'd skip ahead, by the way, if you don't want to have me ruin the beginning of the movie for you if this kind of stuff bugs you, because there's no way you can unsee it once I tell you. When Poe Dameron comes running up to hop into the X-Wing, the white one with the blue accents, before it gets blown up, he climbs up a ladder on the outside. Okay. And then he gets the X-Wing gets hit with the blaster, right? Blaster bolt, and gets all jacked up. He can't take off, and so he jumps off. He jumps out. Well, when he jumps out, the ladder's gone. And I know from a visual standpoint, it looks better for him to jump out, but could it have killed him to show a scene of him pushing the ladder off to the side? Because it's not on the ground. It disappeared. I mean, it was Luke force projecting the ladder, and he climbed up it, and then when he got in the ship, it was gone. Maybe Lor San Tekka was already dead, so that he couldn't do that either. So yeah, when you watch it again, he climbs up the ladder, gets in, and he's got his helmet on, pew pew pew, and then the ship gets blown, and then the ship gets hit, and then he jumps out with the blaster to go put the map in BB-8, and the ladder's gone. There's one more thing, and this one also drives me nuts. When BB-8 gets into the X-Wing fighter in that same little moment, okay, because Poe Dameron climbs in, and then BB-8 gets sucked up the bottom, right? There's an arm that comes down, right? It's like a tube, and it's got like a little suction cup on top, and it grabs onto his top dome, and it pulls him up. Okay, that's all fine and dandy, except for the fact that when he pops up in the back of the X-Wing fighter, he pops up dome first. So how did that happen? Like, the only way that I can possibly justify it is if the suction thing that grabs him, like when it pulls him up, like it curves so that he kind of gets popped up and then his head pops up and then he goes up again. Because it makes no sense. It's that hard. You could have done a little ramp and could have just popped up in there, or had him jump. I don't know. Those two things. And I've just ruined the beginning of The Force Awakens for you. I'm really sorry.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Yeah, that awakening was me ruining the beginning of The Force Awakens for you. So that's why I appreciate so much of the detail in The Last Jedi. And here's one that I absolutely love. I think this is so cool because they didn't have to do this. Okay, so beginning of the movie, the first time we go to the island, after Luke throws the lightsaber over his shoulder. Okay, when Rey is following Luke around, and she's walking up the side, and you can see the ocean. You can see the ocean in the background, and you see some creature in the water. You see like his tail, right, with all the spikes pop up, and it's kind of swirling. It's just really neat. It's just cool that it's cool they put that in the background of the shot because they didn't have to. So she's walking up the hill and there's a creature off in the water, and it looks really, really cool just to see that. Just really adds to the scene. Then we get the overhead shot of the island from above. Sort of that 5,000 foot look. And it was actually in the original. It was the beginning of one of the first teaser trailer, right? And so the camera's panning over. It's right after that shot when they do that overhead shot of the island. If you look off to the right in the water, you can see the swirls in the water that the creature made when it popped up and out. And every time I've watched the movie, I've paid attention to make sure that my eyes weren't deceiving me, like it wasn't just a happenstance. But no, if you watch, when the creature pops up in the shot, when Rey's walking up, he's curving, he's kind of twisting, and you see his tail, what you assume is his tail, kind of pops up out of the water and it splashes back down in the circular motion. And then you immediately see the overhead shot of the island. If you look off to the right exactly where he would have been, you can see the curls in the water. You can see the waves that it made, the white caps. I just thought that was that's so cool. I just want to see Rian Johnson just give him a big old hug. I've said thank you to him a few times on Twitter and tagged him, hoping that he'd respond, but he hasn't done that yet. But man, I just that movie is just so good, and I just want to go and watch it again.
Let the past die. Kill it. If you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
All right, listener feedback. Got a couple of posts to YouTube and emails that I wanted to share with you, and thank you so much for those that write into. I really do appreciate it. Katie Arkey, if I'm saying that wrong, I apologize. Says this: I love the visual starkness of Crate, the white salt over the blood red surface. I wonder if the bleeding red color represents Kylo's wounded psyche, and the salt stings but cleanses his wound. I think Luke appearing to Kylo was cathartic, a chance for him to vent and strike out at Luke, but not suffer the guilt of killing him. Kylo looked spent and hollowed out afterwards. Let me stop here real quick. A couple of things. First off, you know what? I mean, if it means that to you, I mean, that's what I love about these movies, too, is that you can kind of lay on top your own interpretation. When it comes to Crate, we do know, and Rian Johnson has said in a couple of different interviews now, that one of the biggest reasons why they went with that style of that blood red and the salt was because that was their big sort of war, ground war scene, and they couldn't show, blood and destruction, and they used the planet as a visual representation of that. So it's almost like you're ripping the planet open. So the planet itself was serving as the visual link to what you would normally see in battle. And when you know that, after they fire on Luke before Kylo Ren goes down to face him, you look at how devastated the landscape is leading into the door that's been blown open. I mean, if you think about that, like in terms of a wound, I mean, it's grotesque. It's not, but if you think about it, it would be. But I mean, visually, it's just incredibly, incredibly striking. Also, to Kylo looking spent and hollowed out, yeah, I absolutely agree. At the end of that movie, after Luke disappears and he does his no, for Ben Solo and Kylo Ren, that's feeding his rage because he got played again. He's in power now. He's got the people around him calling. He's the supreme leader now, and he blew it. He had a chance to put an end to it right then and there, and he blew it. No, I'm not convinced, however, that he would be able to kill Rey. I mean, seriously, right? I mean, you know, he can just kind of mind. Can he mind trick her into becoming his girlfriend and being? That's really horrible. Okay, sorry. All right, let's get back to to Katie's comments. Now it makes me wonder if the planet used to host Starkiller Base was also a metaphor for Kylo. Interesting. Starkiller sucking power from the sun and storing it in the planet. Han told Kylo that Snoke was using him for his power. Sun, S-U-N, Sun, S-O-N, get it? The collapse of the planet could also represent Kylo's spirit after he's killed his father. Snoke, the deed split your spirit to the bone. If the planets were deliberate representation of Kylo, it makes me excited about the planet in Episode 9. That's an interesting take. I haven't. J.J. Abrams isn't as open and hasn't been as open about The Force Awakens and sort of why they did what they did. Rian Johnson seems like the kind of guy that would do something like that. J.J. Abrams doesn't. J.J. Abrams seems like the kind of guy that would do something just because he thought it was cool, not necessarily because it was representative of anything else. However, let me take that back. You do know at the end of The Force Awakens that I gotta apologize here. I'm wrong. J.J. Abrams does do this. J.J. Abrams said at the end of The Force Awakens that the planet Starkiller Base sucking the sun dry and the light going out was all very tied together. I mean, Poe Dameron spells it out. As long as there's light, we still have a chance. That had dual meaning, and J.J. Abrams said that. Megan Hendricks writes this. Thank you for being a positive voice in the Star Wars community. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. I finished that episode of Steele Wars. I mentioned that a couple of podcasts ago. I was very close on many occasions to turning it off because of Kyle. She's talking about Kyle Newman. Still a fan of Steele Wars listener, but it's really hard to listen to people just tearing it apart because of some of the most trivial things. There's a larger story at play here. Thank you for being one of the few podcasts that still focuses on that. Yeah, look, and I don't have any problem. Thank you so much for the kind words. And I don't have any problem with people having their opinions of the film. I mean, Kyle Newman's a really smart guy, and I like listening to his take on stuff. That particular interview I had a hard time with because he kept saying how much he liked the movie, but then he just kept trashing it. And in my opinion, and I have to go back and listen to make sure that I wasn't hearing just what I wanted to hear, but it really came off to me like he was doing it less like, he was saying it less as this is just my opinion and more as Rian Johnson made a mistake that he didn't do it the way that I wanted him to. That was kind of my impression of it. But I fully admit that I could do what a lot of listeners to my weekly show do, and that is totally have read into that. And then the last one we have, I'm just about out of time for the show this week. Lindsay Conrad stumbled across this by accident, and despite the fact that I've been trying to trim down the number of channels I'm following, I just had to subscribe. Thank you. It seems we have a great deal in common with Star Wars opinion. I'm interested to know your thoughts on how, and this is the one I referenced earlier, how the sequel trilogy fits into the ring theory and what that will mean for 9. I have loved the mirroring of Anakin and Kylo Ren, and that has been established so far, and personally I want to see a movie that follows through on the connections to the prequels in some way. Love your ideas, so interested to hear more thoughts. I will say this. There is going to be, for one, we know J.J. Abrams is doing it. J.J. Abrams has said the movie is going to be different. I think he's been freed from the shackles of having to echo the other films in a way that he did in The Force Awakens. No way do I feel like The Force Awakens is a retread, but it does have a lot of similarities because that's what it was designed to do. J.J. Abrams said they had to go backwards to go forwards. That being said, there's no way there won't be similarities at the end of 9 to Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Sith. you've got two individuals that are going to have to face off at some point in time with Rey and Kylo Ren. And that's going to, I don't see any other way that's not going to be the end of that film. What that ends up meaning, what ends up being resolved, kind of remains to be seen. But there's no way to, I don't think there's any way to get around that. The final, the final act in Episode 9 is going to be Rey and Ben Solo, Kylo Ren facing off again. And I cannot get here fast enough. Thank you so much for checking out episode 110. Want to hear your thoughts about everything that we covered this week, whether it's The Last Jedi, Reylo, or certainly Solo, A Star Wars Story. So, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter @JohnJONJustice. Also on Facebook, same thing, JON Justice. And the show, whether you listen to it on iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, Spreaker, or Stitcher, drop me a comment, leave me a rating, and just say hi. All right, have yourself a great week. We'll be back next week for episode number 111. And until then, may the Force be with you always.